That's not gonna work, this is gonna block my view of the jury.
Move that over, move the function over, we're not gonna hold that, yeah. Can I move that out of the way?
That's fine. Yes, thank you. There's an eye.
One more, right?
I'm sorry, you may want to move that, the corner, people can't, that angle isn't good for them. The jurors on the end here, you're gonna need to angle it slightly toward the emergency.
Well, they've got to walk by here too to get into the.
Oh, that's a good point.
So why don't I just move it back here until they come in and
Folks in the audience, no food or drink allowed in the courtroom in the audience.
Under the doors, no food or drink in the courtroom. Right, I want to discuss schedule and timing. Mr. Lawrence, I know you indicated that you anticipate approximately 2 hours for the closing. We're going to have to stop in the middle somewhere. I can do this for you, the food that that have been ordered for the jurors, they've made their choice. Some of them have little hot lunches. I'm not going to have it. It's expected to be delivered between 12:20 and 12:30. We go another whole hour after that. That's not going to work. You're going to have some angry jurors. So what I can do is I can indicate to you when it gets close to 12:30 if you think that you can finish and wrap it up before 20 of, quarter of at the absolute very latest. Fine, if not, we'll take a break at that time. I know that's not optimal, but I don't know how to work around it under the circumstances. The other thing council should be aware of, we do have some smokers on the jury that have specifically asked to have their smoke breaks today, anticipating, being in the jury room and not being able to have a smoke break. So we're not taking an hour and 15 minutes for lunch. Lunch is for them to eat their lunch and come right back out, but I'll also add on time if any of them wish to have a smoke break. And then after all closings are done, I am going to give them one final break to accomplish that before I read them the final instructions on deliberation. So, anybody have any questions or concerns? I want to put anything on the record regarding that schedule.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, let's get the jury in here, back out to the jury room as soon as possible.
Jury. Jury. Jury may be seated.
Everyone else may be seated. Counsel for Defendant Wayne Greenlaw, you may present your closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, still good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And as Mr. Will told you, we likewise appreciate the fact that you've given up over 2 weeks of your lives to be here and to listen to this case. And we've watched, and I know you paid attention, so we appreciate that. I'm going to start with a couple of things that you did not hear from the state in their closing argument. And I want you to remember a couple of things about closing arguments. Number one, I'm going to get to talk to you one time. Mr. Will's going to get to talk to you again. Okay? So I would ask that you pay attention to what I say. I also would advise you again, as I did in opening statement, that what I tell you is what I believe the facts have shown. It is not absolutely the facts of this case. That's up to you. But let's talk about a couple of things that were missing from that initial opening statement that you've heard previously in this trial. Number one, you didn't hear Mr. Will make any mention of 911 calls. Now, I advised you in opening statement that sooner or later, the judge in this case was going to read you the law. And she did, 47 pages worth. And nowhere in there did you hear the term 911. Now, you heard the elements of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter, shooting into a building, and firing a weapon in public. And nowhere did you hear an element that required that the defendants call 911, because it's not the law. And you shouldn't consider it. You have 47 pages worth, and that's plenty to consider. You don't need to be considering something that's not. Number two, in the opening statement of this case, and in much of this case, the state's position was that the alleged victims in this case came to the Greenlaw house one time. That's what I told you. We told you that wasn't true, and the facts would show otherwise. You make your own determination about what the truth about that is. A closing argument or statement is kind of the reverse of what an opening statement was. In an opening statement, I laid out for you what I believe the facts and the evidence in this case would be. And I believe we laid them out accurately. In a closing argument, it is an attempt to recap for you what we believe the evidence is and what you've heard. And once again, I would caution you that what I say is not evidence. It's up to you to determine what the evidence and the facts are. But I am going to tell you what I believe was introduced during the course of this trial. The opening statement by the state in this case was very short on facts. But I'm going to go back and see if I can't recreate for you the facts of this case. Because at the end of the day, despite the fact that the state told you that the only thing that really matters about this is what was in the minds of the defendant at the time, you're going to hear and already have heard jury instructions that tell you it's the circumstances that surrounded the defendants at the time of this that make a determination about their mental state. I'm going to read it to you later on, but I want you to keep that in mind. So the facts, the circumstances, the surroundings are the case. You can't skip over. Here's the facts as I believe them to be, and as I believe the evidence in this case has shown them to be. On October the 28th, 2011, the day before this took place, Wayne Greenlaw lived at number 9 Aspen Street with his 76-year-old mother, Shirley Tamplin, and his brother, Ray. Wayne had lived there for about 3 years. His brother and mother had just recently moved in. In the day or so preceding this, he had decided, he being Wayne Greenlaw, that he needed to clear some trees or brush from his property, and he had borrowed a chainsaw from Danny Meadow, who lived down the street at number 13. And I believe you heard Danny Meadow tell you that. Now, they weren't close friends, but they certainly knew each other. And of course, as you've learned during the course of this trial, Danny Meadow, in fact, was the best friend of Brian Levy. Having borrowed the chainsaw, he cleared some brush, trimmed some trees, which left some debris, and he made a decision on the 28th of October that he was going to chop those up and have a fire pit in the backyard, and he was going to tend his fire that night because his property is very close to the woods, it abuts it. And that's what he did. Now, during the year or so preceding this event, Mr. Wayne Greenlaw had become good friends or had befriended a young man by the name of Scott Searles. And you heard Scott Searles during the course of this case, and you can tell that he's got his own demons and his own problems. But be that as it may, he had befriended him and they had become friends. And Scott Searles, at the time, was living with his girlfriend, Kendra Walls, over at number 9 General Doolittle, literally a block and a half away. They had 2 children. They'd been together for a while. And on this particular evening, at or about 6 o'clock, Scott Searles went over to Wayne Greenlaw's house and he rode his bicycle. Now, you may recall that they had been out maybe a little bit earlier than that. They'd gone to the store. Him and Ray and Scott had gone to the store, bought some food, and gone to the liquor store. But in any event, upon returning, Scott Searles went over to Wayne Greenlaw's house and he rode his bicycle. They sat around the fire out back, they drank some beer, and eventually Kendra Walls came over. And folks, this turned out to be, this was a happy day. It was a happy day. Mr. Greenlaw was home with his mother and his brother. He was cleaning his property. His good friend had come over, and that evening his good friend had asked his significant other to marry them, and there was a little bit of dispute about whether she actually did or not. I believe that the record really would reflect that she did, but the bottom line is that at that point in time, everyone was in a joyous mood. There wasn't any indication of all the events that you've heard here that were going to take place, were going to take place. Sitting around, enjoying their company. Wayne Greenlaw was excited for his young friends, and he asked them or told them that, hey, why don't you take my Jeep and go out and enjoy some private time? And they did. And now you know that they went out to this little place that's really not depicted on that map, but you've seen it, Dry Lake. And that ended the events of October the 28th. Started out as a perfectly happy, normal day around the Greenlaw house. But in the following hours, it would turn into a nightmare. And the nightmare began when Scott Searles and Kendra Walls met Justin Riley, Brian Levy. That's what it began. They all got together out there. You've heard the testimony. You know that there was a conversation about pills, and about selling pills. You heard the conversation where there was a call to Wayne Greenlaw's house and to ask if he wanted to buy pills, and that he didn't. You also know that during the course of this evening, that Mr. Searles and Ms. Waltz invited Riley and Leverett over to Wayne Greenlaw's house. The only problem was, of course, they didn't tell Mr. Greenlaw. But they made a proviso, an exception, if you will. Y'all come over and join the party, but don't go if we're not there. And how would they know if they weren't there? Well, the answer was the white jeep. Eventually, the four people out at Dry Lake parked. I believe the testimony went something like this, that Mr. Searles and Ms. Walls went off for a little quiet time themselves, but very shortly after they separated, Riley and Leverett arrived at the Greenlaws with no Searles and no Walls and uninvited. Now, there is a factual dispute as to how they gained entry. I believe you heard a couple of different versions of that. I don't know which one is true, but I can tell you what the versions that you heard were. One of them was that that Wayne was still outside, out back, tending his fire, and that Ray was inside the house, and a knock comes on the door, and he answers the door, and he assumes that the people that are at the door are people that Wayne knows. So he lets them in. That's one version. The other version is they just came in. I would suggest to you that in either version, who doesn't know the answer to that is him, because he wasn't in the house. You also know from the testimony that that took place between 3:30 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And you know now, despite what you were told earlier by the state, that that first visit, which was by truck from Dry Lake, where Leverett and Riley pulled up to the front of the Greenlaw property and came in, ended in an argument. You know that they were there long enough to have a beer and some rum, because it seems that's one consistent thing that everyone seemed to recall, that they were there long enough to have a beer and a shot of rum. Now, how long that was, I don't know. But we know that eventually they were asked to leave. And now the question became, why were they asked to leave? Well, one thing that you heard from Mr. Riley was that Brian Leverett, number one, was drunk. And you in fact know that from his blood alcohol level being 1.94, where the medical examiner testified he was 2.5 times over the legal limit. And that he was a know-it-all. He just couldn't let things go. And at some point in time, apparently he, being Mr. Leverett and Mr. Wayne Greenlaw, both of them gun owners, got into a discussion about hunting rifles and hunting guns. And for whatever reason, Mr. Leverett did not think very highly of Mr. Greenlaw's hunting play, which led to a dispute, which led to them being asked to leave. From the evidence that I heard during the course of this trial, you judge yourself, there did not appear to me to be any testimony that at that first meeting anybody hit anybody. anybody struck anybody, anybody pulled a gun on anybody. But they did argue, and they were asked to leave. And they left. And when they left, they got back in their truck, and they drove somewhere. And I suggest to you that you know where they drove, because you know where Mr. Leverett's truck was found. Where was it found? Found in front of his house. Right over here at 14 Mansfield. And folks, that should have been the end of it. You know, the state has repeatedly told you that, you know, that should have been the end of it, and it's Greenlaw's fault, all this is their fault. They're sitting in their house minding their own business, and it's all their fault because they don't stop. Well, they did. That was the end of it. You heard Wayne Greenlaw, in fact, testify and asked a question from the detective about what happened, or was that the end of it? He said, that was the end of it. That was the end of it. And it should have been the end of it. Story should stop here. None of us should be here. But it wasn't. Right after those guys leave, there's very few things in this case that we know specifically time-wise. There are a few, but one of them that we do know is there is an exhibit that's introduced into evidence in this case that shows a phone call from Wayne Greenlaw to Scott Searles and Kendra Wall that took place at 4:37. That's important. That call lasted 3 minutes and 50 seconds. You'll see it yourself if you want to look at it. And the substance of that phone call is something like this. Who in the heck were these two guys? How did they get over here? Did y'all invite them over here? I believe if you think about it, you can imagine basically what took place on that phone call. That means that that phone call would have been in at approximately 4:41 a.m. in the morning. And you know by the evidence that Mr. Searles and Ms. Walls were still out at Dry Lake on the back side of it. That's where everybody goes. And it takes a few minutes to get back over to the Greenlaw house. And you heard testimony that they arrived there around 5 a.m. And if you think about the timeline, it makes sense. Now, did they arrive there exactly 5 a.m.? I don't know. Was it 4:55? Could have been. 5:02? Maybe. But it was around 5 a.m. in the morning. And when they got there, you know who wasn't there. Riley and Levery gone. So earlier, when the state told you all this happened in the first visit, ain't so. Ain't so. So, they pull up there, and according to the testimony, they stay 10 or 15 minutes, and they're about ready to leave when who reappears? Greenlaws are in their house. You know who? Riley and Larry. And unless I missed it somewhere, I don't see any record of any phone calls, any invitation, anybody calling them, walking to them, or saying anything to them about, hey, why don't y'all come back? So for the second time that night, they came back uninvited. And not only were they uninvited this time, they had left before, after being asked to leave. and they were both very much under the influence of alcohol. You saw Justin Riley testify in this case. One of the things that you get to do, one of the things that the judge read you earlier, is you get to judge not only what people say, but their demeanor, their overall personality, how they deliver things. Think about a drunk Justin Riley, 5 a.m. in the morning, after having been rejected in his attempt to sell pills, after having been asked to leave. Talking about an unhappy. You know, Mr. Will wants you to believe that the Greenlaws were unhappy. They were perfectly happy. Till these two guys showed up. Now they were concerned enough to call their friends and say, who the heck are these guys? And when they show back up, shortly thereafter, Mr. Searles and Ms. Walls leave for a very brief period of time, a matter of minutes, and they drive Ms. Walls back over to her house at number 19. And I believe that if you listen to the evidence closely, and you listen to the testimony, you could surmise that that took place somewhere around 5:15. It could have been 5:10, could have been 5:20. Yeah, I don't know. I suspect you don't either. There's nobody that I saw in this case that was wearing a watch. But the bottom line is around 5:15. What's the significance of 5:15? Well, there is one. Because right across the street, a young man gets up every morning and he goes to work. And he leaves every morning sometime between 5:10 and 5:20. It's Eric Robinson. And Eric Robinson tells you the following, that I saw people over there out in the front yard. I don't know exactly how many. I don't know if there were any other vehicles over there, but I saw them, and when I saw them, at or about that time, and I believe he said it was closer to 5:20, that everything appeared to be okay. That he did not see a fight, at least. So at 5:20, Scott Searles and Kendra Walls have left to go over to their house. Mr. Robinson leaves. There are 4 people there. Now you know who they are. And everything appears to be upset. But by 5:30, in 10 minutes, all that had changed. Every minute. And what do you know about that? What happened at 5:30? Well, here's what happened at 5:30, according to the evidence in this case. The lady right across the street, the little lady came in here and testified, Diane Townsend. She told you everything that she heard. And right up the street, Eric Robinson's wife, Nicole Robinson, had a bird's eye view of it all, looking out her blinds. And I introduced a picture in this, had her circle the blind and circle where she saw all the activity taking place. And what did she see? She saw a fight. Well, she saw the fight before she called 911. And we know she called 911 at 5:36. Diane Towsley never did call 911. But she saw and heard an awful lot. And I suggest to you, it was kind of uncanny that when Ray Greenlaw was telling you about the events that took place, if you remember back to the testimony of Diane Towsley, it was almost word for word. I mean, it was really uncanny. Down to the number of times that he told them to leave the property. Down to the exact words. He told you that he was standing at his door. His brother's out back. He's standing at his door trying to keep these 2 guys out of his house. Now, why they were trying to get in, I have no idea. And I suggest to you, you don't either, because there wasn't any evidence to do that. What we do know is they were trying to get the daggone house. Why? Well, one, they'd already been there before. They came in once. I guess they thought they could come back. I don't know. But here's what I do know. That man right over there stood at his front door and literally fought with these guys to keep him out of his house. Now, he knew that his elderly mother was back there in that bedroom. He knew that his brother was outside or maybe in the bathroom. But he's out there by himself. And here they come again. Now, who's stopping who? Who's responsible for coming back? And we know it's all true. You heard him say it. Forget him. Two neighbors saw it and heard it. It's true. It's a fact. He was unsuccessful in getting them off his property. So he closes the door, he goes into the garage, he grabs a machete out of the garage, he goes back to the front door, and he starts waving around that machete. Get the hell off my property! That didn't work either. And he has to say it repeatedly. And eventually, he is attacked by Justin Riley, and he whacks him with that machete, and he hit him with the machete, and that's a fact, but you know why he did it. What did he do? What did they do to provoke those guys coming back to their house? What did they do? They didn't do a thing. After those guys left, they're tending to their business. It's all over. They came back. Now, the first time to get them out, just said, hey, you got to go. No fight or anything. But the second time, they weren't leaving, folks. They weren't leaving. Mr. Riley gets hit with a machete. He still doesn't leave. He's still up there arguing, yelling. And I believe, as Ms. Townsley would say, he was not listening to their heedings. He wasn't listening to their warnings. It literally takes him taking the machete back inside, going out and getting his pistol, and firing 3 warning shots to get them to leave the property. That's what it takes. Those are facts. And you know how you know there's a fact? That young lady you heard on that 911 call, she's sitting right there listening to it all. That's why she, along with another bunch of people in this case, were joint witnesses. A very unusual kind of an experience in a criminal trial. Because if the state hadn't called them, I would have. Because they told you what happened. And it is the facts that surround the event, the circumstances that help form the state of mind of defendants at the time whenever they're trying to defend themselves. It's not in a vacuum. Right about this time, Scott Searles pulls back in. And he pulls up in the driveway, the lights are on. The reason you know that, or about the time, if you listen closely to that tape, Nicole Robinson tells you that the headlights of the Jeep are wrong in the driveway. And when he pulls back up, all hell's broken loose. I can imagine he pulls in, he's going, what the heck's going on? And of course now, take into consideration his state of mind. You saw him and his testimony about his 50 beers, and you can imagine. And Nicole Robinson tells you the following. 3 warning shots are fired. There are now 4 people out there, one of them in a white shirt, that you now know, because of the facts in this case, to be Scott Searles, standing out there in that driveway, and after the warning shot, they all 4 head west. 2 of them leave and go. What was the other 2? They come back. They come back to number 9 Aspen Street. They come back to their house. They come back. And once again, it should have been over. It wasn't. State has told you there's 7 minutes where the defendants are doing nothing. You've listened to that tape, I've heard it a million times. You make up your own mind. I don't hear more than 15 or 20 seconds when something's not happening. Bottom line is, shortly thereafter, a gentleman in a light gray shirt goes back out to the street and faces westbound. You know why he facing westbound? Because Nicole Robinson said there's something going on up the street west of my house. That guy's standing out there with no weapon, yelling, westbound. Now, we don't know what he was yelling. Nicole Robinson didn't hear it. Towsley didn't hear it. We don't know what was said. But I think under the facts and the circumstances of this case, that you might be able to reason what might have been said. That person goes back in the house, and within a few seconds, for the first time in all this stuff, Mike Long appears. First time. He's been back in the house. He was outside, or in the bathroom, when all this took place out there with Mr. Ray Greenlaw and the attack out there. There's absolutely no evidence in this case before you that he saw what happened out there, that he saw Ray Greenlaw hit anybody with a machete. There's no evidence he even knew that anyone had been hit, and that's an important factor as we go forward. But what he did know, and he told you in that statement, was he heard loud noises out there and that all hell was breaking loose out there. So what did he do? He went into his bedroom where he has a gun safe, and he unlocked that gun safe and he grabbed his Mini 14. I think the evidence also is at some point in time he took out a 9mm or maybe 2. So there was more than one weapon taken out. Exactly when that took place, I don't know. But I do know that he went into the safe, he got out as many 14, he got out at least one 9mm, if not two, laid them on the bed, and he went out the door. And what did he do? Two more warnings. And it's significant to note that at or about this time, Nicole Robinson is telling 911, and you heard it again, I see a flashlight. I see a light. It's the police, right? No, they're not there. Well, that's what's happening on the east end of the street. Let's go down the west end. We know that at or about 5:39, because that was the testimony of two different people, and I'll refresh your recollection about it if you've forgotten about it. We know that at or about 5:39, Brian Leverett is going westbound. And he's going westbound from my client's house. Not his house, my client's house. Where he's been there twice, uninvited. Where he's now been thrown out twice. And they see him walk past and go into his house. And he stays there 2 or 3 minutes. And he comes back out at or about 5:42, because that's their testimony, because that's when Kirk Madison called 911. He called 911 and told them that a guy just walked out of his house with a shotgun, headed up the street. East end, west end. My client and his brother are defending their house. Again, they're firing off warning shots, 5 of them on 2 separate occasions, standing in the street, yelling westbound. Stop over. He goes and he gets a Winchester model 1200 pump shotgun. Now, in addition to getting a shotgun, he got a light. Described as people as mag light. Now, Kirk Madison saw the shotgun, but he didn't see the light. Marianne Fitzgerald, right across the street, seeing the same things, she sees a long object and a flashlight. And that flashlight's on. The facts are also, because I think it's important, and you talk about all the facts, good or bad, is that when he went by, he being Mr. Leverett, he told Madison on his way back out of that house to call 911 because his friend had been shot in half. That's a fact in this case. Now, did he call 911? No. He went in his house. Stayed in there for 3 minutes or so, 3 to 5 minutes before the testimony. His friend had been hacked, according to him, without any provocation whatsoever. Instead of calling 911, what did he do? Grabbed his dadgum shotgun, he loaded that sucker, grabbed a flashlight, and he went up the street. And when he got up the street, he got to number 13, Aspen. And that's where he met up with his best friend, Danny Meadow. why the state doesn't want to talk about Kirk Madison. I understand why they don't want to talk about Danny Meadow. Because when you take into consideration the testimony they give you, the question is, why are we here? That's a good question. Because what did he tell you? What did he tell you? He told you the following, that my good friend came up that street. He was looking for them brothers, and he was going to kill them. He had murder in his heart. He was going to kill them. He was sweeping that street with that shotgun and that flashlight. Those are facts. I don't make them up. That's what you heard in this courtroom. That's what I told you you'd hear in an opening statement. And you did. It's true.